What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Mets Off Day Live. I am your host, Chelsea Sherrod, and joining us today is co-host of the Mets pod, Connor Rogers, and host of the New York podcast for the Ringer and frequent SNY contributor, John Jastremski. We're going to talk all things Mets over the next half an hour, and we will also take some fan questions live as they come in, so make sure you send those in. But first, welcome to the show, Connor and JJ. How you guys doing?
Great, Chelsea. We'd be a little better if we weren't coming off a disappointing Mets sweep, but can't complain.
Yeah. Fired up. It's great to be with you, Chelsea. It's great to see Connor, one of the best-looking guys in the business. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of great nuggets to report from the Mets over the course of the weekend. They left their offense, I don't know, maybe in the Philadelphia series. Maybe they left it in Colorado on the road trip. But hitting with runners in scoring position was, dare I say, optional.
JJ, yeah, they left it in the 2022 season is where they left it so far.
Oh, my gosh, so much shade to start the show. This is going to be a good one. I don't know what I did to deserve you guys. Okay, before we get into the Mets' most recent homestand, this is how we always start the show. So let's talk about how the Mets spent their last off day. So Brandon Nimmo went golfing at the Glen Club. Mark Canha went to Obelix, a French restaurant in Chicago, while the Mets were there to face the Cubs. And Brett Beatty posted a picture of him and Francisco Lindor with the caption, "Riding the wave." So, Connor, which off day sounds best to you?
It has to be Mark Canha's. Hopefully some good food can get the bad taste out of the mouth from watching the Mets lately. And listen, I'm not a good golfer, so if I went golfing like Nimmo did, I think the frustration would actually build. A little different from JJ, who can actually play a little bit. But for me, it has to be going to get some good food and hopefully take your mind off of a 500 baseball team right now.
Yeah. JJ?
Well, Connor, I do play a lot of golf. I don't play a lot of high-level golf, but it's an easy call for me. You're giving me an off day. I mean, I'm working today, for goodness sakes. I'm doing Mets off day online. I'm doing sports night tonight, and I'm still squeezing around to 18 in about a half hour, 40 minutes. So anytime I get an opportunity to go embarrass myself on the golf course, it is an absolute no-brainer. I'm sure Brandon Nimmo's display of golf was much better than what I'm going to do at about 45 minutes from now at Silver Lake Golf Course.
Keeping your priorities straight. I love that for you, JJ. Okay, where we stand. So the last show, we were concerned after the Mets won 6 of 12 against the Cubs, the Rockies, the Phillies, and the Blue Jays. And while that road series was up and down, the Mets came home. They swept the Phillies, only to be swept by the Blue Jays right after. Connor, how are you feeling right now about this team?
The Mets kind of keep confirming who they've been this season, and that is simply a 500 baseball team. Now, how they get there or how they got there this week was different, right? You sweep a division rival that had big expectations coming into the season after a World Series appearance last year, and not a lot has gone right for the Phillies. But you still get that sweep. You start to feel good about things. And, yeah, the Blue Jays are a good baseball team, but to not even win one game there, to go 4-2 on the homestand, that looks a lot different than 3-3. And it was an ugly 3 losses, right? You got nothing from the offense so far. Even when your pitching did hold up or you did bounce back Sunday with a couple solo home runs, the hitting isn't timely enough to drive extra runners in. So the Mets are exactly who their record says they are. They just got there a different way this week that started with some excitement to turn things around and then ended how it has often with disappointment. They are not finding consistency. When the offense is clicking, the pitching is not going deep into games. When the pitching goes deep into games, the offense can't find any timely hitting or play situational baseball. So the Mets are probably as frustrated as we are watching them.
Yeah. How do you feel, JJ?
Yeah, you keep waiting, guys, for this team to put it together from a complete standpoint because they finally start to get length out of starting pitchers. That's been a narrative we've talked about a lot over the course of this year. When are the Mets going to get length out of their starters? Well, they did get serious length out of Justin Verlander on Friday night. I mean, Buck Showalter let him go and throw north of 110-plus pitches, which was so refreshing to see. But the Mets are unable to win the game because they can't get the big hit. On Saturday, it's a tight game, and this is where I'm going to get on Buck Showalter a little bit. You got Vlad Guerrero on the line. I understand the Mets are not hitting. I know you can make the argument you want to set yourself up for the extra innings, but you can't let Vlad Guerrero Jr. beat you there with the game on the line. You're going to lose that game again because you can't go and get a big hit. And then on Sunday, listen, the Mets tried with Kodai Senga, something that they eventually need to see, right? Like, if the Mets are going to be a playoff team and you're playing deep into October, you're not going to be able to set up your rotation more often than not, giving Kodai Senga that extra day of rest. So you got to see how it's going to shake out over the course of the regular season. Well, it went terribly for Kodai Senga. He was all over the place. It felt like we were watching a Kodai Senga road start where his command was awful. He's walking guys left and right. And when he was in the strike zone, he was getting bombed, for goodness sake. So bad all around for the New York Mets. Yes, Toronto is a good team. Yes, the Mets should be very fortunate that they are in the National League as opposed to the American League at this point in time. But we're in June, and they're a 500 baseball team. I expected a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's talk about something that was a highlight of this past week, and that was the Hall of Fame induction. So over the weekend, the Mets inducted 4 new members into its Hall of Fame, including 2 legends on the field and 2 in the booth. Our very own Gary Cohen was a part of that. On this special One Word and Why, we're going to react to the incredible speeches made by each inductee. So let's start with Al Leiter, and Connor, we'll start with you.
I think lengthy in a great way, right? You could tell Al's passion with the length of that speech. I thought it was awesome just to listen to him, and somebody that obviously can relate to the Mets fan, but was also a great player here as well with his New Jersey background and his family background. So lengthy in a really, really positive way from Leiter.
I'm going with Jersey. You just hit on it. Al Leiter is the ultimate Jersey boy who spent basically an entire baseball career starting down the Jersey Shore, honing his craft, then getting drafted by the New York Yankees, but then really leaving his mark on the Mets more so than any other franchise. That 99 wild card game, a brilliant start. And you think about those Piazza Met teams, if there was one starter you wanted on the mound, it was going to be Al Leiter. He was going to compete. He was going to have that nasty cutter and slider. He was going to be able to go deep into games. The Springsteen would be blaring from the loudspeakers before the start. So I'm going with Jersey for Al Leiter, Chelsea.
All right. I like it, JJ. Okay, let's talk about Howard Johnson. What are your thoughts on Hojo, JJ?
Power. And I know you look at Hojo's power numbers, and if you compare them to like the steroid era, you're going to be like, oh, wow, he ended up with a couple of 30 home run seasons. But when you think about that era of Major League Baseball, power was a rare thing. I mean, that was as dead a ball era as you're going to find in the 1980s, where pitching ruled supreme, and you would see a guy with 30, 35 home runs, and it would jump off the page at you. Howard Johnson was able to do that. He's a part of the 86 team. Well-deserved honor for him in the Mets Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I would say almost underappreciated in this era would be the word for Howard Johnson. And to piggyback off of JJ, I mean, this is somebody that had over an 800 career OPS for the Mets in an era where maybe power and getting on base wasn't as prevalent or wasn't as, regarded as it is now, or that's all anybody cares about. So Hojo was a special player, and it was great to see him get his dues and get his day.
All right, let's get into the broadcasters. Connor, Howie Rose.
I mean, iconic, right? Some of the biggest moments of my childhood listening to the Mets when you're going a million different places in the car was obviously on the radio, and it just syncs with Howie's voice, the moments he's called, the passion he's put into it. It almost makes you grow up and think everyone is like that, every baseball broadcaster on the radio, and then you realize it's not. He's special for a reason. So iconic when you really sync up people my age, our age, with what Howie has done and the moments he's called and will continue to call.
Simple for me, guys. Books. As for put it in the books, Howie Rose signature call. And, the amazing thing for me, guys, is that Howie Rose and Gary Cohen flip-flopped, right? Like, Howie has spent a lot of time now on the radio. Gary has obviously spent all of SNY's tenure calling the New York Mets. But when I grew up starting to watch the games, Howie Rose was on television calling Met games. He did the New York Rangers. He did the New York Islanders. And both of these broadcasters are just they're like the soundtracks of so many summers for New York baseball fans who are Met fans. And the passion for both of these guys, we'll get to Gary in a minute, but it just oozes out of them. The knowledge, the background, like the idea that they are lifelong Met fans and they are getting to live out this dream. And Howie obviously getting to do the Rangers as well and the Islanders for a great amount of years. But, I mean, I'm thinking of one word for Howie Rose. Books. Put it in the books.
All right, put it in the books. I like that. And, of course, both of them kind of being like hometown heroes, right? Both coming from Queens, starting at Shea Stadium and sitting there. And now just to see their careers develop and get to this point is incredible. All right, let's talk about our very own Gary Cohen, Connor.
I mean, I'm going to cheat and use 2 words here, or maybe even 3. I'll say broadcasting role model for people that grew up in New York, right? When you look at it, if you grew up in New York and you know Gary's story, growing up in Queens as a Mets fan, sitting in the upper deck and now being the voice of this team and what he's been able, you just listen to him and he is the poster boy of what a broadcaster should be, right? He is so good at calling the game, having almost podcast conversations with the booth during the slow moments of baseball, although we're starting to lose that with the pace of the game. Gary Cohen is a perfect broadcaster in every single way, and somebody for me that didn't go to school to do this, really just kind of self-taught, learned, was a fan of the sport, a fan of the Mets. I relate so many of my growing moments to just watching way too many Mets games and listening to Gary, an incredible person in this industry.
Yeah.
Gold standard. That's what it boils down to. And I think Connor hit on something that makes Gary such a brilliant broadcaster. Yes, obviously nailing the big call and nailing the big moment is a part of his vernacular. But the way he makes other broadcasters better, it doesn't matter who you put in the booth next to Gary Cohen. And listen, that's not to knock Ronnie, who is an all-time great broadcaster and Met, and same for Keith Hernandez. But he gets the best out of them. He knows how to tee them up. He knows how to set them up. On a game in which the Mets are up or down by 10 runs, you're still really enjoying the broadcast because you never know what those 3 guys are going to break out. So Gary Cohen's like the Magic Johnson of broadcasting, man. He just sets you up and makes it as good as he is call at nailing the call and delivering what is going on in a ball game.
Yeah.
The ability to make the other broadcasters better is an incredible trait.
Yeah, and Keith and Ron will say that. They say that Gary steers the ship in a way for them. And I mean, he's the ultimate pros pro and really, just like Connor said, an absolute inspiration to us who are also in this industry. All right, let's get into Francisco Lindor, a frustrated Francisco Lindor. After the Mets loss on Saturday, Francisco spoke about his frustrations as of late as he battered under 100 in his 5 games before that with a home run as his only hit during that time. So let's take a closer look at what he said after the loss. So guys, he said 2 opportunities to drive in a run, didn't get it done. Connor, what's your reaction to his struggles with runners in scoring position?
He's pressing. He's really pressing. And we've seen Lindor go through tough stretches as a Met. We also have seen him have marvelous moments as a Met. And it feels like with Lindor, while this entire lineup has been really bad this week, let's not overlook that. Pete Alonso, before that home run yesterday, was actually in a worse stretch than Lindor. But Lindor's moments this year or this week really were frustrating in a sense that he was taking pitches right down the middle and chasing pitches high and wide. And the swing looks long with Lindor, where you wonder, especially when he bats from the left side of the plate, is he just trying to hit a home run because there's not a lot of faith in this lineup right now? That's what I see with Lindor. I have full confidence he's going to break out of it. But when you're the $341 million man and you're the shortstop and one of the stars of this team, all of that spotlight is going to be on you. And unfortunately, you're going to hear the boos.
Yeah. And so, JJ, here's
There's
another
no doubt
thing.
he's pressing.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to cut you off. Do you want to finish that thought?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. So this is another thing that Francisco Lindor said. He said, this is one of those situations where I'm in a downfall. So, JJ, is this how you feel when you watch him at the plate?
So I want to admire Francisco Lindor, Chelsea, for owning the boos and acknowledging the boos and not shying away from what the Met fans were doing on Saturday. And I think he's well aware of the fact that he has to perform at a much higher level. But here's the problem. The Mets cannot afford Francisco Lindor to go and have a mediocre season. They're just not built that way. The way they have built this lineup, to Connor's point, he is their megastar. He is the guy they brought in from Cleveland to go and be their cornerstone alongside Pete Alonso. Last year, he played at a very high level for the New York Mets. He had great runners in scoring position. He drove in a ton of runs. He hit for power. He played high-level defense. This year, Francisco Lindor, it's now early June. It's no longer a point where you say, oh, it's early. It's not so early anymore. We are now 60-plus games into this Major League Baseball season, and a guy who's making north of $30 million a year is hitting 210. I mean, that is just completely unacceptable. And if this is the version the Mets are going to get of Francisco Lindor all year, they're in deep trouble. They're in the deep waters. They can't afford it. We see the weaknesses and the warts of the Met lineup at times. towards the bottom. They can't have a guy who's supposed to be a given, who's supposed to be one of your stone cold locks, doing his thing, being a star. Dare I say, not performing like a star. And that's been an issue for Lindor. I don't want to hear about the homers. I don't want to hear about the RBIs. That OPS and that batting average is unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. But JJ, how do you see him getting out of this slump? What needs to happen in order for that to happen?
Well, that's a great question. I wish I had an answer for you. I'm sure Francisco Lindor, if he was with us, guys, he'd say he wish he had an answer for how he can get out of this slump. I'm going to go back to 2 years ago because Francisco Lindor had a down first year with the New York Mets. There was a lot of stuff off the field that he was dealing with. The weight of the big contract. You remember that raccoon nonsense that went on. And he really got into a comfort zone in the month of September. And that 3-homer game against the Yankees on Sunday Night Baseball was kind of the moment for him where it was like, all right, this is the guy Francisco Lindor is supposed to be. So I don't know if it's like a signature moment, Chelsea, that he needs, or maybe he needs a breakout game, or maybe it's just a blue pit that kind of, takes the Band-Aid off. It kind of gets him going. Like we've seen that in baseball where, hey, a guy hits a blue pit, then all of a sudden they start finding holes and they start getting into a groove and they start getting into a rhythm. But I would say for Lindor, it's being a little bit more aggressive at the plate and having something that can kind of jumpstart his season. He needs a jumpstart in the absolute worst way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we do have some breaking news right now via the SNY MLB Insider, our insider Andy Martino. Andy says the Mets are expected to DFA catcher Tomas Nido, according to a source. Tandem will be Alvarez, Narvaez, Connor. How do you evaluate Nido's time with the Mets this year?
He just hasn't been able to get going with the bat at all. And I think there's a problem where he has never been an offensive plus, that this is who Nido is. He's usually a solid backup defensively. He's not much at the plate. And the Mets have two significantly better options than Tomas Nido. And they are not a roster that can afford to carry 3 catchers for a couple of reasons. One, they need that extra roster spot. They need the space. 2, why are you taking starts away from Francisco Alvarez and now Omar Narvaez back? The Mets need offense, and Narvaez can hit. He can hit a lot more than Tomas Nido. So that's a significant upgrade when you have Alvarez and Narvaez. I would honestly start to consider Alvarez in moments to DH, especially against lefties, if you do want to play Narvaez a lot, which they will, especially what they're paying him. So Nido was the odd man out, and it's a tough situation for a guy that has been well-liked by the Mets fan base, but didn't produce at all this year.
Yeah. JJ, how do you evaluate the last 6 seasons that Tomas Nido has spent with the Mets? If this is, in fact, the end.
Yeah, he's a pro's pro, Chelsea. He's a backup catcher. I think that's the best way to look at Tomas Nido. He's somebody that's going to do a really good job of handling a pitching staff. He had a couple of big hits over his tenure as a Met, but he's not giving you the sort of offense that the other 2 guys that they have at that position are going to provide. And listen, I salute Tomas Nido. Obviously, the pitchers liked working with him. I thought it was obvious last year. Somebody like Max Scherzer in particular really enjoyed working with him. But the Mets are at a point now where Francisco Alvarez, who is the top prospect in their system, who is one of the top prospects in all of baseball, he's arrived now. Like, we're no longer at a point where it's like, oh, well, is Alvarez ready for the big leagues? Can the Mets waste him in AAA? Nonsense. He is one of their best power hitters. Like, if you're thinking about the Met lineup from a power standpoint, Pete Alonso is their number 1 power hitter. Francisco Alvarez, from a power standpoint, is number 2. Therefore, he has to play. He has to get the reps. He has to be out there 4 to 5 days a week. And if that means Omar Narvaez is kind of the caddy, great. They can't carry 3 catchers. They need the roster flexibility and versatility. Tomas Nido, salute. Best of luck. He'll probably have no problem finding a job and will end up being a backup catcher somewhere else and probably will have a 10, 11, 12-year big league career. Good for him. But the Mets are moving forward with the future, and that future, of course, is Francisco Alvarez.
Yeah. And Connor, how do you see the Alvarez-Narvaez split playing out?
Well, no Buck Showalter, you know that he's probably going to give Narvaez plenty of playing time. It almost feels like an even split, even if people agree or disagree with that. And my solution goes back to the fact that I want Alvarez's bat in the lineup. And it's not like the Mets have a powerhouse at DH from either side of the plate right now. Let's be real. I mean, they play Vogelbach against righties. We know what his season has been like. they sparingly play Vientos, but Vientos gets a lot of looks against lefties. And if Vientos doesn't get going soon, he might be back in Syracuse. So I think that opens the door where Alvarez, if you want him in the lineup consistently, say it's a 50-50 split at catcher, I want Francisco Alvarez playing more than half the Mets games, play him as a DH a little bit as well. And I like Narvaez as a hitter. So I think it's a big plus. I know people will focus on the Nido side of things, but getting Narvaez back is a plus for a lineup that, God, they need somebody to hit for average pretty soon.
Yeah, and our eyes will be closely watching how that split plays out moving forward. Okay, let's get into a small sample size. We talked about the offense a little bit early on. Let's get back into that. Over the Mets' most recent homestand, the offense couldn't seem to find its footing, hitting only a 177 overall, a 133 with runners in scoring position. That hurts. Connor, who is concerning you the most at the plate right now?
You don't like to look at the young guys because this shouldn't be on them. This payroll, you would think the veterans are actually producing, but we've talked a lot about the veteran struggles with this team. Right now, quietly, it's been a really rough stretch for Brett Beatty, and this matters because he's batting fifth almost every single night. About two plus weeks ago, he had an OPS that was 100 points higher. We've seen an OPS dip of 100 points. At that point, he was batting 258. Now he's batting 227. So Beatty has not been good for a couple of weeks now. And when you're batting fifth in this lineup, you need more than that. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that situation. Everybody's guilty of this. There's no Met that you look at and say, oh, he's been fine, he's above this. Everybody's had a down year so far. But the reality is they've thrusted Beatty into a situation where there's big expectations, and it's been a tough go.
Yeah, and I think my answer is kind of correlated to the expectations I have for this particular player. And I know in theory, you look at Jeff McNeil and you see his batting average and you're like, oh, it's 280. It's fine. But that's like 40 to 45 points lower than what it was last year at this time. And I think Jeff is probably somewhere in the middle. I don't think Jeff is necessarily a 330 hitter, but I think he's better than a 280 hitter. And the problem you have with McNeil, for all the positives he brings as a player, and I love him. He's one of my favorite Mets. He puts the ball in play. He grinds out at bats. I love that he chokes up on a bat. Like, he's a fantastic player for me to enjoy watching, but he does not hit for a ton of power. So if he's hitting 320, he is a monumental asset to your team. If you have your number 3 hitter hitting 270, 280 without that power, you feel it within the lineup. So I'm waiting to see the version of Jeff McNeil that we saw last year. I think it's a matter of when, not if. But that's one of the guys I have circled because, Connor hit on it. There's underperformance up and down the lineup. Like, even Alonso, who's leading the league in home runs, and his OPS is great, and his power numbers are great. Pete's not a 230 hitter. Like, Pete is a better hitter than what he has shown. Like, he's kind of been an all-or-nothing type of guy. I think Pete's more of a 270, 275 guy. So this is up and down the lineup. They are not performing with runners in scoring position, in the clutch, in general, the way they did last year. And when you don't have as much power as some of these other teams in the National League, Chelsea really shows.
Yeah, I think all or nothing is probably the best way to describe Pete Alonso right now. Connor, is there any bright spot in the lineup right now?
Oh, that's a tough one after that kind of stretch, right? When you look at it, I mean, McNeil, like JJ said, is underperforming by his standards. It's nice that Pete's hitting the home runs, but we know Pete's an even better hitter than this. You've liked the flashes you've seen from Alvarez, right? And Alvarez should not be relied on to be a top 2 or 3 hitter in this lineup at 21 years old, at a position that no 21-year-olds are in baseball playing catcher, obviously at the level he has. So I would say the bright spots from the kids, but those are starting to dwindle a little bit. Nimmo's even been hot and cold. I'll say my biggest bright spot in this current moment, it looks like Starling Marte's figuring it out after a slow start. And that kind of takes me back to the conversation we had about Francisco Lindor, who will not sit. Lindor will, you could say what you want about Lindor, but he will play every single day. It's kind of on Buck Showalter. Maybe you throw Marte back in that 2-hole for a little bit and just flip them. Have Lindor bat 6th a couple of times. See if he can get right, figure it out. If Marte's the hot bat right now, and that's not saying much with this lineup, get Marte back to the top of the lineup.
Yeah,
that's where I'm going. I like that, Connor, because if I'm going to find a positive takeaway, Marte is starting to put together more competitive at-bats. And let's not forget what a spark plug he was for the team last year. When he played, it felt like it kind of jump-started everything with this lineup. They had Nimmo and Marte 1-2. Marte and what he brings on the base paths. And even at his advanced age, he's such a super freak of an athlete. It gave the Mets an unbelievable dynamic that, to me, has been lacking so far this year. So, Chelsea, if I'm looking for a positive, and trust me, it's tough to find after this weekend against the Toronto Blue Jays, it's the idea that Starling Marte maybe is starting to straighten things out.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with the both of you on Starling Marte. That is probably the only point of optimism that we have right now as far as the offense is concerned. Okay, let's get into the pitching. And this segment is called A Tale of Two Sengas because that's exactly what it is. Kodai Senga, he looked dominant in his outing last Tuesday against the Phillies, going 7 scoreless, surrendering only 1 hit, striking out 9, and most importantly, walking 0 batters. However, in his first start on regular rest since coming to the States, so since this entire season, his first start on regular rest, Senga only went 2 2/3 innings, giving up 4 runs and walking 5. So, Connor, do you think that losing that extra day of rest had that much of an impact on Kodai Senga's performance?
It's tough to say because we've seen inconsistency from Senga with the extra rest all year. So do you rely on that as the sample size? Do you rely on the fact that maybe it was, as Ronnie pointed out in the broadcast, it's not like his stuff was diminished. His velocity was fine. But do you wonder, without the extra rest, was he overthrowing? And that's why he didn't have command of the strike zone. So I think for Senga right now, it's tough for Senga, right? Because when you look coming into the season, the expectations were fair as him as a number 3. That's kind of what he was paid to be. You knew there was going to be an acclimation period coming over from Japanese baseball, and having Scherzer and Verlander in front of him as expected, would you be able to live with the highs and lows of Senga as a number 3? Well, Verlander missed a lot of time to start the season. Scherzer missed time as well with the suspension and was not right out of the gate. So kind of thrusted Senga into being a number 2, borderline number 1, which isn't fair expectations. I think this is what people should have expected with the big adjustment period, and that's what we're seeing. So I don't necessarily attribute it to the rest. I just think this is the growing period Senga is naturally going to go through this first half of the season.
And JJ, how would you go about using Kodai Senga in the future?
So in a perfect world, you try to give him the extra rest because it is a duplicate of the routine he had for years when he was pitching in Japan. The problem is, as you get down the stretch of this year and you start going into nitty gritty, let's say you're trying to make the playoffs. Let's say you're trying to push the Braves for a division title. Let's say you're in the playoffs. You may not have the luxury of Kodai Senga going on extra rest. So to me, and I know some Met fans didn't like the idea of Buck Showalter saying, oh, we're going to pitch him on regular rest. No, this is a good thing. He's going to have to experience it a couple of different times throughout the regular season. So that way come September and that way come October, hopefully, he's accustomed to it. It's not a culture shock for him doing it for the first time. So this is something the Mets had to straighten out. I think they're going to try to get him his extra day of rest as often as they can, but you're going to see it now from time to time over the course of the year. Hey, let's see how he handles pitching on regular rest. And we finally got a Kodai Senga home start that was like one of his road starts. So maybe that means one of his road starts is going to be like one of his home starts, guys. I don't know.
I like that perspective, JJ. We'll have to see how that one goes. But I think that there was a little bit from Mets fans, at least a little bit of panic when they did see that final line from him. So I think that the perspective from both of you on that is really important. Okay, let's get into the rest of the rotation. Max Scherzer, since his last off day, has put together 2 7-inning, 1 earned run outings. Connor, what do you think has been clicking for Max as of late?
Just the variety of pitches that he could throw. We've seen Max, when he might not have a put-away fastball, be able to go to a curveball and locate that pitch. We've seen him obviously need to crank it up and use the fastball when necessary. Max is just the ultimate gamer, and I know that's a cliche term for a lot of great veteran pitchers, but that's exactly what Scherzer is. And he's a guy that wants to work deep into games. I think he understands his body at this point of his career, where some nights he can come in and he goes, I can overpower these guys. And some nights he looks at a lineup and go, maybe I'm not at 100% like I was when I was 30 years old, and I'm going to rely more on a mix of off-speed pitches. So I love what I've seen from Scherzer. I'm not surprised. He feels like a guy that can pitch with power when he has it and can pitch with a mix of pitches when he needs to go that route as well. So Scherzer, very, very promising stretch here for the Mets, and this is who he is.
Yeah. I want to come to you, JJ, on Justin Verlander. He went a solid 6 innings, giving up only a solo shot to George Springer in the first. He also through a season high 117 pitches. Does it concern you, JJ, to see Verlander throw this many pitches at this point in the season?
No, I love it. Chelsea, maybe this is the old school baseball guy in me. Maybe I'm a relic, but Justin Verlander's been doing this his entire big league career. And he felt strong. He made the one mistake to George Springer in the first inning for the leadoff homer. It felt like he got better as the game went along. And I applaud Buck Showalter. He said in that sixth inning, all right, big dog. All right, go get it. Try to find a way to finish off this sixth inning. And he did. It's something Verlander is going to be able to do. And he's been fine. Listen, I know the gopher ball has been a little bit of an issue. I know he had that stinker at Coors Field. I'm going to sound like one of these guys that's making all sorts of excuses. That's fine. Plenty of guys go to Coors Field and pitch like garbage. Justin Verlander, you're not alone in that regard, especially when it comes to big-time pitchers. He's going to be fine. Just keep him and Scherzer on the mound every fifth day. The Mets need that.
Yeah. All right, let's talk Carlos Carrasco. Connor, he's looked solid in his last two starts, going 6 innings in each of his last two starts, giving up just 1 run in each. How important is it to get these types of starts from Cookie?
It's massive because while Quintana works his way back, you need somebody to give you innings who's not named Verlander or Scherzer. We know Senga has struggled to work deep into games. Megill is not a guy that will ever consistently work deep into games. It's just not the type of pitcher he is. Somebody else in this rotation has to be able to do that. I'm not expecting Cookie to pitch 6 innings of one-run ball 4 out of every 5 starts. I don't think that's fair either, but this is why they kept him on that option this year, because he's a guy that if he can eat innings for you, save some of a bullpen that's without Edwin Diaz, and why you're getting a guy in Quintana that is an even better pitcher, but also the same mold that will give you a lot of innings as well. This is the type of Carrasco they needed desperately.
Yeah, Connor kind of touched on it a little bit, JJ. Let's talk Tyler Megill. On Saturday, he had one of his best outings of the season, going 5 1/3 innings, only giving up 1 run himself. JJ, do you think that Megill can continue to fill that Quintana gap?
That's the million-dollar question. In Chelsea last year, he broke down. Injuries ended up being a problem for him. Then he came back and clearly wasn't the same guy. They tried using him out of the bullpen. It didn't work. I think so far, all things considered, you got to be pleased with Megill and what he's provided in that back-end role. He's taking the ball every 5th day. More often than not, he's giving the Mets a chance to win. And I think assuming he can take the ball consistently, that's what he'll continue to do.
Okay, we do have a fan question. This comes from Joel C. on YouTube. And he says, when is it time for Daniel Vogelbach to be DFA'd? Connor, let's start with you.
I could jokingly say 3 weeks ago, but I won't be that harsh. Listen, this is somebody that they traded Colin Holderman for, a guy they could really use in the bullpen this year, by the way. So I think they were holding on, trying to get some return on investment from Vogelbach. And he's such a perplexing player because when you look at his numbers of making contact, he hits the ball really, really hard. The other side of things, he swings the least basically out of almost anybody in baseball. So I think the Mets were thinking if he starts to take less pitches and find his counts and swing, the home runs will come, the doubles will come. We know how far he needs to hit the ball to hit a double, but still it's tricky right now because I know people are clamoring for Mauricio, who has pop as well. But once you go that route, there's no going back, right? Vogelbach being DFA'd, you lose him. If Mauricio comes up and struggles the way that Vientos has at the plate, you throw your hands up and go, well, what do we do now? I think that's the Mets' ultimate fear and why they're trying to work through this with Vogelbach. So I know a lot of people will not agree with this, but that's why I understand it. Outside of Mauricio, who is still a wild card, as great as he's been, it's a giant, giant variable of if you lose Vogelbach, you might have nothing.
Yeah. JJ, how do you feel?
When they go and get a veteran bat come late July, Vogelbach will be off the Met roster. That's what it boils down to. It is I hate saying this. You don't root for anybody to lose their job. He's not performing. He's not producing. Question of when, not if, he's going to be replaced.
Yep.
Yeah, and there it is. All right. We do have an injury update from Edwin Diaz. He spoke to The Athletic recently, saying that his knee is feeling great in his rehab, and he's not closing the door on making a late 2023 return to action. Wow, Connor, how much has this team missed Edwin in the bullpen depth that they have?
It's fascinating because a lot of people would look at the great season David Robertson has had and go, well, the Mets have been fine at closer. He's actually probably been one of the better closers in the National League this year. But the trickle effect has been massive because that trickle effect of losing Diaz has put a lot of saves on Robertson's plate. And then you're bumping everyone else up. You're asking Ottavino and Drew Smith to pitch in high leverage 7th and 8th inning situations, but the starters don't work it deep into games. And that's how you have Nogosic and Dominic Leone, guys like that, Jeff Brigham. They're pitching 6th and 7th innings, sometimes 5th innings. It feels like every day, every time you turn on a Met game and it's the 6th inning, these guys are in. And that's a problem for the Mets right now, as we've seen Leone give up the home run yesterday that lost them the game. So the closing situation itself, it's almost had no impact on, which is insane when you look at how amazing Diaz is, but credit to Robertson. But the trickle effect of bumping everybody up in the bullpen has been catastrophic.
Yeah. JJ, just following up on that, how wild would it be if Edwin Diaz did make a return this season?
Be pretty insane, not going to lie, Chelsea, but I can't count on that. That's all well and good that he's given good news to Ken Rosenthal. We all want to see Diaz on the mound, but I think we got to be real about this. If you get him back at any point in 2023, it is a monumental bonus. Bonus. And you can't look at the trade deadline and assume that's going to be the case. The Mets should still be very proactive between now and July 31st, going and adding to a bullpen that absolutely needs an arm or two.
Yeah, and that's something that we will definitely be watching. I mean, if he makes a comeback this season, that would be absolutely incredible. Okay, looking ahead, the Mets have an important 3-game series against the Braves starting tomorrow, followed by a 3-game set in Pittsburgh against the 31-27 Pirates. JJ, who is your X factor for this stretch?
That's an easy call for me. I'm going with Max Scherzer because it looks like Max Scherzer has found a new lease on life. He's back to pitching the way he did last year. And he should have revenge on his mind after what happened down in Atlanta last year when the Mets really needed him and he failed miserably in that big game on that Saturday night. So I am fascinated to see how Scherzer in hot Atlanta against the best team, for my money, in the National League is going to handle that challenge.
Yeah, Connor, how about you? Who's your X factor? I mean, this series, seems like a must win for the Mets at this point.
I mean, looking at the pitching, if we want to go there, this might surprise people, but if you're lining up your aces, you expect them to go deep into games. What does that mean? That means somebody like Adam Ottavino needs to get really big outs at the end of games. We know Robertson's going to pitch, but how do you get to him, right? That's been the big question. So I look at Ottavino and Drew Smith and go, man, the Mets are going to need huge outs in this series from those guys. We saw what Atlanta did to Arizona's bullpen yesterday, the grand slam off Miguel Castro. Atlanta will scratch and claw till the last pitch of the game. Yep. Man, it seems crazy, but the Mets are going to need a huge performance this week, both from Ottavino and Drew Smith in this bullpen.
Yeah, huge. I 100% agree. All right, closing things out here from the both of you. We'll start with you, Connor. How are you spending the rest of your off day?
This is going to seem absolutely insane. I'm almost afraid to admit this right now, but I am watching the quarterback class for the 2024 NFL draft right now as we get ready to do our summer scouting preview for the quarterback. So I am in, don't ask me how, it is June 5th and I am in scouting hell at this moment. It's embarrassing to admit, but that's how my night will go.
And this is why Connor Rogers is the best in the business when it comes to evaluating the NFL draft. And I'm not afraid to say it. That's why he's a regular on New York, and that's why Connor is killing it, might I add, at a variety of different platforms. For me, it's very simple. I have to work later today. So I guess my off day is the next 4 hours on the golf course. Pray for the trees and the birds and any of the surrounding areas with me hitting the ball. But that's where it will be spent, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, I love that. The both of you, though, pros. I'm so happy that you both are able to join us. All right, before we go, the Mets have made it official, announcing that catcher Omar Narvaez has been returned from his rehabilitation assignment and was reinstated from the IL, and catcher Tomas Nido was designated for assignment. So those are huge moves from the Mets. Thank you so much for watching this edition of Mets Off Day Live. Our next episode will be Monday, June 12th.